welcome to City Inside Out. Today's topic, how many jobs should the city encourage in South Lake Union? The mayor recently announced a big plan to entice over 20,000 new employees to the area, mostly in biotech. Many like the idea, especially given the weak economy and high unemployment, but some wonder whether the city should first go back to the neighborhood and ask if this big plan is what it wants. Joining us on the topic will be council members Richard Conlon and Judy Nicastro, and later two Seattle Times reporters weigh in. Growth in South Lake Union gets our attention today, right after the news. Well, get set for another money measure on the ballot this fall. Earlier this month, Greg Nichols announced a $230 million plan to upgrade Seattle's 33 neighborhood fire stations. If you can believe it, some of those still in use were originally built when fire engines were drawn by horses. City council members have the final say about what gets on the fall ballot. They had lots of questions and concerns earlier this week about the mayor's fire station plan. Among them, will voters accept yet another money measure in this age of Iman? And why is it a levy and not a bond? Finally, there was this concern from Margaret Pagler about whether these upgrades need to be done all at once.
Another model that we've been very successful at is phasing capital improvements. And the parks issues, we've had a series of voter-approved measures with respect to parks and open space, with community centers and some of the big downtown civic projects. We've had a very successful series of phases. The school district uses phased capital levies for their capital programs, and it seems to me that this is a program that just cries out for that approach.
For some council members, the fire levy proposal is another example of the mayor getting ahead of them, especially with his big sweeping proposals of late. They want the mayor to include them earlier in the process, or at the very least to provide them with more detailed information so they can evaluate his plans. Judy Nicastro, however, actually doesn't seem to mind the mayor's style. The council can do its job whether or not Nichols wants to involve them in his formulating process.
I somewhat disagree with you, Councilmember Steinberg. I understand what you're bringing up with not having input with the executive's proposals, but I'm not so sure that we have to or that we should. It's our job to then amend and alter those proposals if we don't like them or if we believe that it's not the best policy.
Good news on the money front for the city this week, a rare occurrence in these recessionary times. The Federal Department of Homeland Security just doled out some more funds. Last month, you may recall, the city received $11 million for its post-9/11 security efforts. And now this month, another $18 million. Who knows how much we'll get next month? All the money will be used to defray cost of enhanced security in the ongoing heightened alert atmosphere. Repair or replace the Alaskan Way Viaduct? Probably not the former. New cost estimates show that retrofitting the existing structure is only slightly less expensive than replacing the viaduct altogether. At least some council members were hoping that a retrofit might be a cheaper alternative. The most expensive option by far is to sink the viaduct into a tunnel, something the mayor favors. This news also about the waterfront. A new review of the city's seawall shows that it's in worse shape than originally thought. It's the underground structure that literally keeps the city from flowing right into Elliott Bay. In response to the new finding, repair crews are adding some concrete reinforcement, but the mayor says it's quickly outliving its useful life. Nichols, incidentally, was in Washington, D.C. recently testifying on Capitol Hill for more money from the federal government for these mega projects. Preserving history seems to have a pretty good future these days. About a month ago, the current monorail along Fifth Avenue was designated a historic landmark. Then, just last week, the mayor proposed giving that status to a number of the city's older fire stations. And now the council is jumping in. Earlier this month, they sent a directive that all city-owned historic structures, over 200 of them, be more carefully tended to. The legislation requires that city workers doing repair or demolition on any of these structures must first consult with the Historic Preservation Program. More vocal concern to report about the Seattle Housing Authority's plans to raise rent on low-income seniors. It's an effort to keep up with rising costs, the public landlord says. At a hearing this week, seniors who would be affected turned out in large numbers to express their displeasure with raising rents and cutting services.
I've been quite alarmed, I would say, hearing that the resident manager might have to leave here. And I'd hate to think of this place without Nancy. She gets up every morning, cleans out the 2 latrines down here, and sometimes they're not very nice to clean out. But she does it ungrudgingly and keeps the place going. She's always sort of at our beck and call. And, and I had a vision one night of without her, who in the heck do we call if something happens? And this soon becoming a downtrodden tenement.
And now for our neighborhood roundup. Here's what's new in communities across the city. We begin in West Seattle, where for the first time in history, there is now a police station. It was dedicated earlier this month. Until now, police officers patrolling in West Seattle reported to a precinct way across town. This item from Columbia City, a new movie theater is in the works. It will be the only cinema in all of Rainier Valley, an area that was once home to several movie houses. The new theater will occupy an old Masonic lodge. This news also from Southeast Seattle, but on a less positive note, there will be no swimming this summer at Pritchard Beach. A casualty of the recent city budget cuts were the lifeguards at this Lake Washington bathing spot. The city is redirecting area residents to the nearby Seward Park, which will remain open for swimmers this summer. You can hear some citizens up in Haller Lake holler loud these days. The complaint? A huge 3-story Costco warehouse planned for that part of town. It's to go right near the corner of Aurora Avenue North and 125th. Also planned near that intersection, a Krispy Kreme donut shop, which incidentally opens next week. Add up the new traffic those two businesses will generate, and you get a pretty big number, which is what has the residents worried. And finally, this item from Belltown. Off-leash dogs in Regrade Park are one step closer to reality. The Parks Board recently voted to give the area over to dogs as a last resort measure to combat the drug dealing and prostitution that has plagued the open space for years. The City Council has the final say later this month. And now for our City Inside Out calendar for the next few weeks. First up, some monorail design workshops to announce. These are to brainstorm and get public input about what the various stations of the new transit plan should look like. Those along the SoDo West Seattle part of the line will have their say on Tuesday, May 20th at 6:30. For those in downtown and Pioneer Square, that workshop is on Wednesday, May 21st. And finally, Queen Anne, Belltown, the brainstorm session there is on Thursday, May 29th. 3 district council meetings to pass along. If you want to help shape your neighborhood, here is a chance. Delridge meets on Wednesday, May 21st, Greater Duwamish on Wednesday, May 28th, and Northwest on Wednesday, May 28th as well. Some neighborhood park work parties to tell you about. Grab a rake and shovel and help clean up the Ravenna Ravine. That's on Thursday, May 22nd. Same plan for Madrona Woods on Saturday, May 24th from 10 to 2 p.m. And finally, there will be an owl prowl in Camp Long over in West Seattle on Friday night, May 23rd. Join a group who will walk softly through the night woods in search of owls. Gathering for that is at 8 p.m. If you would like any more information about owl prowls or other events we've listed, we hope you'll see our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And finally today, a fast-growing problem that public officials are trying to get a handle on before it gets out of control. And no, this is not SARS. This is garlic mustard. For those not in the know, garlic mustard is a weed, indeed a pesky, highly invasive one, and it's showing up in more places around town. The city and county are asking people to kill it before it overtakes even more areas. This is a picture of what it looks like. Don't let the pretty flowers fool you. This weed is trouble. Residents who see the plant are encouraged to call and report. The number is 764-HERO. No, I'm just kidding. That's not the number. The actual number is 296-0290. Well, that's it for the news. Just ahead, job growth in South Lake Union. Does the mayor want too much of it? We asked council members Richard Conlon and Judy DeCastro, and later 2 Seattle Times reporters weigh in. Stay with us. You're watching City Inside Out. We now welcome Judy DeCastro and Richard Conlon. Both are members of the Seattle City Council. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Richard Conlon, I begin with you. You were the one that seemed to throw water on the mayor's plan for a big high-tech biotech hub in South Lake Union. Is that your position?
No, it's not my position. And I should say it's not really the mayor's plan, because high-tech and biotech investments really come from the private sector who make those investments. What I asked was, how can we consult the neighborhood and make sure that the neighborhood is involved in making those decisions that the city may be making about its investments?
And your point is, I guess you were the guy who helped lead the neighborhood planning process. You were chair of the neighborhoods committee.
That's correct.
South Lake Union did a neighborhood plan. They had certain ideas about how much job growth there should be there, how much housing growth. Your argument is, this big plan would whip right past that, blow right through what the neighborhood is on record as wanting.
Well, the neighborhood didn't set those targets for job growth. The city set those targets. They're part of our comprehensive plan. And we told the neighborhood, this is what we think is going to happen here. Please draw a plan to show what needs to happen in the neighborhood if this in fact does happen. Now what's happening is there's increased private investment. This is a good thing. We're getting more jobs in that neighborhood. And so what we need to do is to go back to the neighborhood and say, so now that we've got some changes in the conditions, what kind of things should you or would you like us to consider in order to make the neighborhood work most effectively?
You asked the mayor to do just that, go back to the neighborhood and ask these questions. He, in effect, said no.
That's correct.
Are you going to do it anyway?
Well, that's my position. I think it's our responsibility as a city, and if the mayor's unwilling to live up to that responsibility, then I think the council needs to figure out a way in which to take the leadership on that.
Just a couple things. I want to get Judy Nicastro in here, but is there precedent for doing that? We had about 39, I believe, neighborhood plans.
38,
38. How many of them have been, quote unquote, reopened in the way you want here?
Several of them have been reopened in different ways. There's been at least 2 in which we've had major revisions to the neighborhood plan. In Wallingford, they'd actually significantly exceeded their housing target, and the South Wallingford neighborhood felt that it had not been adequately involved in creating the Wallingford plan. So we reopened it. They had a neighborhood matching fund grant to do a process, and the new South Wallingford neighborhood plan is actually being considered by the council right now. In the Madison-Miller neighborhood, the zoning along Madison, the community felt was not, in fact, what they would like to have after the plan had been reviewed. They felt they had not had adequate time to identify the zoning changes they needed to have. So the city council, in cooperation with DCLU, did a process involving the neighborhood, asking them what they wanted, came up with some zoning revisions. We adopted that as a council a year ago.
So there's precedent for this.
There definitely is.
Judy Nicastro, a good idea to go back and do one of these kind of revised plan, or is that too much process too late?
Well, as long as it doesn't delay the current growth that's going on or any of the buildings that are going up, then I think that it can be done together. I'm not so sure why it's one way or the other. I mean, the fact is neighborhood plans were done. They're important. The Office of Policy Management is claiming that they looked at the plan, that one of the interesting things with the plan is the language is pretty vague. So you can say, well, we did look at the plans and this is the plan, right? And I think that we need to make sure that we are doing that, but I don't want to see the process delayed. I mean, if we've got 20,000 jobs coming into the area right now, and if just by us opening this up, this will delay the growth in that's a problem. But I'm not convinced that that will happen.
So you're agnostic now. You're on the fence about whether this should be done.
No, I think it can be done
Meaning
at the
open
same
the
time.
plan.
Right. I think that can be done without delaying the growth.
It seems like, I mean, the minute, Richard Conlon, you suggested anything like revisiting a plan down there, the mayor in about 2 hours had a press conference convened and said, here is the council wanting to get in the way of growth and jobs, and there's just more process.
That was very disappointing, and I felt very frustrated by that. We felt that we were making what was essentially a formal request I wouldn't exactly call it a routine nature, but certainly it was something that we felt was simply something that needed to be done. And we had no intention of creating a political firestorm or something of that nature. And some of the language in the mayor's news release I felt was absolutely wrong and totally incorrect. The interpretation that has been picked up that somehow we were against jobs in South Lake Union, I find outrageous, and I'm totally offended by that.
Yeah, that type of polarization is the way, unfortunately, this mayor works, and it really wasn't fair. I mean, what I'm saying, the neighborhood plans, we can look at that while the growth happens. It's not this dichotomy that this mayor is always creating, us against versus them.
Do the residents want 20,000 new jobs in that area?
I don't know how many jobs, they want jobs and they want housing. And it's very important that we get the kind of housing that's needed for that amount of jobs coming into the area. And I think we can do that through changes to the land use code.
Like what? What would you do to, you're the land use chair, so
Right.
it's in your bailiwick, as they say.
Right. Well, to look at, first of all, the bonus program, the transfer development right bonus program to increase the height, to allow for, if housing is put into that neighborhood, that a developer would get 20 extra stories put on the building. Also, we can look at reducing the parking requirement, especially in order if there's housing put into the building. And that would be good, especially if we're going to do a trolley system. I mean, what you want is where people can live and walk to where they work, as well as that there's mass transportation. So I see that we can do at least 2, if not 3, land use changes to incentivize the housing down there. But let me just make one, we need to have housing for all income levels. And one of my concerns is that only income, those are going to be high-paying jobs, which are great, but we just can't have, condos for $500,000 selling in the neighborhood. We need a spectrum of housing.
What's the risk of doing a biotech center? Is this another potential bubble that could burst?
Good question.
Well, I guess my response to that would be Seattle is relatively well positioned to do a biotech center. We're not one of the leading 4 or 5 in the country, but we're very high up in the second rank. We've got a great university that has terrific success in getting grants from the National Science Foundation. They're number 2 in the nation in getting those grants. We've got the Fred Hutch. We've got several other investors, particularly Paul Allen, who's interested in developing biotech. So we've got a great potential. We shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We've got to do other things. We've got to make sure we keep Boeing in this city. We've got to do things that will develop other kinds of jobs and employment opportunities. But we should definitely look at biotech as a potential very good thing to happen in the city.
Junior Castro, would biotech even be talked about in this part of town if it weren't for Paul Allen, who owns a ton of property down there? Many see as driving the city on this one.
Possibly. I mean, Fred Hutch moved down there. They're phenomenal. The Seattle Cancer is down there. So I think it's a natural growth that biotech, which I don't believe is a bubble. It's been around for a long time and it's a growing industry. It makes sense that they would be a little farther away from the university, and that neighborhood seemed sort of like a natural place for them to go.
If you don't do a planning process, Richard Conlon, or reopen the planning process, what's the downside?
Well, I think the downside is really 3 things. Number 1, we may face further conflict in the neighborhood. This is the kind of thing that stimulates people to file lawsuits and do other kinds of things that actually delay development. So I would argue that failing to do a planning process is actually a real potential for some very negative things happening. The second thing that may happen is we will not have the kind of housing development to complement the employment growth that's happening. And the third thing is we may not make good decisions about the transportation investments that are being proposed. There's a lot of money being talked about for transportation investments in that area, and we need to be very deliberate about how we spend what are limited public resources in order to make the transportation system work.
One final question, Junior Castro. The idea is about $500 million in new public money that would be required if you were to do this. I mean, more power for the biotech hubs and the streetcar and the improvement to Mercer, all the rest. Do we have anywhere near that kind of money to even create a biotech hub? Is this just a pipe dream?
No, it's definitely not a pipe dream. First of all, the money would be spent over many, many years. It's not as if we're going to write out a check anytime soon. And some of that, at least $200 million of that, is for a light facility that we need to do anyway. And also fixing the Mercer mess is good for the entire city. That's another $200 million. So I think that us putting in the infrastructure is important, and we'll do it gradually, of course.
Thank you both for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Richard Conlon and Junior Castro are members of the Seattle City Council. Stay with us. 2 reporters from the Seattle Times join us with their thoughts. You're watching City Inside Out. We now welcome Marty McComber. He is a reporter with the Seattle Times. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we should say Bob Young, your colleague, was due to join you, and he had a last-minute conflict and couldn't be here.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So you both have been writing about South Lake Union. You've followed the story. How do you react to Richard Conlon's strategy here and what he did or didn't do right?
Well, it was an interesting proposal. I think he may have regretted the way he worded that letter, because I think it gave the mayor a chance to really set the debate in his favor by by saying that this is about jobs and not about neighborhood planning. He got out ahead of the issue, I
And
thought.
the letter, of course, is his letter in effect to the mayor saying we need to kind of reopen the neighborhood plan here.
Exactly.
How is the mayor, why isn't the mayor more receptive, as far as you can tell, in reporting other work to considering the neighborhood plan? I mean, the city went through all this neighborhood planning process. Why not, if there are job targets that are way above what they expected, why not reopen that? We've done that in some of the other neighborhoods.
Well, I think there's two reasons. The first is that I think he really wants to get this pushed forward right away. And so there is a time element in this. He has a few years in his first term to really show that he's trying to create jobs in the community. And I think that is driving part of it. On the other hand, I think by opening up the neighborhood plan, you really give opponents a chance to start picking it apart. And with Paul Allen in the picture, he's sort of a lightning rod for neighborhood activists. It's just kind of traditional Seattle to sort of question billionaire motives. And so by opening the neighborhood plan, he would invite that sort of criticism and that opposition.
I mean, you're bound to get someone that's going to come up and say, hey, this is the problem with 20,000 new jobs.
Right.
It'll have this and this and this effect on the neighborhood.
And then they'll bring up the one thing that's always hard to counter: why are we spending public dollars on infrastructure for a guy who's the fourth richest man in the world?
What do you hear from residents in South Lake Union about this idea of creating a biotech hub?
Well, there's a number of residents who are really vocal in opposition, not necessarily to the idea of creating a biotech hub, but that their neighborhood's going to change so dramatically and so fast, and they don't feel like they have that much of a say. Now, South Lake Union's a pretty interesting neighborhood in that it's pretty much controlled mostly by property owners, commercial property owners. The residential side's relatively small, 500 to 800 folks live there. It's hard to say. There's a lot of folks who live in South Lake Union who are apartment owners, and they tend to be not as engaged in what's happening because they can simply pick up and move without too much trouble. But the debate in South Lake Union has been largely shaped, and the neighborhood plan largely shaped by the interests of the commercial property owners who, before Paul Allen sort of stepped in, have been mostly small business owners.
Would this be happening if it weren't for Paul Allen?
Absolutely not. I mean, Allen's ability to get 50 acres in a single neighborhood is just almost unprecedented in modern Seattle. It is unprecedented in modern Seattle. And he's going to invest $500 million in the next few years in just the first 9 of the projects he hopes to do down there. That level of investment and level of change is staggering, and we wouldn't be having this discussion if it wasn't for Allen's folks wanting to do some really big projects down there.
Does the mayor risk going in too fast, too hard, and with the downside being he's not listening to the community enough? I mean, where does his neighborhood support come into play here and come into jeopardy?
I think he gambles it a little bit. I think he obviously was a neighborhood candidate in the last election, and so he has that as a base. Whether he's drawing on that sort of as a capital and assuming that he can kind of take some hits on that side without really giving up that mantle is what I think he's trying to do here. He certainly has become much more favorable with the business community and seen it as more in step with some of their motives and agendas.
Because they were suspicious of him during the campaign.
No, absolutely. They were much more in favor of Mark Sidran, who was going to be the Giuliani of Seattle. And
What kind of things do you hear from businesses down South Lake Union and other businesses as you report about this mayor?
About this mayor, you hear that he has been the biggest surprise, a really pleasant surprise for them. I think a lot of them assumed he would not be the kind of mayor that he is in terms of really pushing public investment to spur private business development in the city. And he's doing it in several neighborhoods, South Lake Union being one of the most visible.
Did the council ever have a chance? I mean, it seems like if you're going to get up and say anything that's remotely approaching taking a pause on growth, which is how Conlin and really Steinberg and Licata, I guess 3 people signed that letter.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they were pegged very quickly by
Right.
the mayor. Is there any way to back out of that box?
It's going to be hard for them, I think, now. I mean, I know they will say over and over again this isn't about being against jobs, but in essence, that last sentence in that letter they sent out said maybe we should not be doing things to encourage job growth if it violates the neighborhood plan. And so they've kind of painted themselves a bit into a corner, and they're going to have a difficult time trying to get the the tone of the debate switched back to this is about neighborhood planning and respecting the process that people across the city, thousands of people across the city, spent a lot of time and effort over the last few years putting in place.
And that's what I wonder if the mayor ends up looking like he's railroading over that neighborhood process. If he does this in South Lake Union, I guess that's what we'll see.
Right.
It is interesting that the mayor maybe let one news cycle or half a news cycle pass before he was convening a press conference of his own in response to that letter from Conlon.
His timing on that was brilliant. Basically, he took the initiative and set the tone of the debate.
And what does that say about the mayor?
I think it says that they're much more strategic in the way they approach information and the debate in Seattle. They try to get out ahead and shape it, and I think this is a case in which they did a pretty good job of setting the agenda. Now the neighborhoods came back pretty strong, and they got a bunch of coalitions of folks, not just in South Lake Union and Northgate, but across the city to kind of come out and do their own press conference to say, hey, this is really about the neighborhood planning process and the integrity of that process. And it's not an anti-jobs platform. So they did counter pretty effectively, too.
Is the mayor's strategy, as far as you see it at work in South Lake Union, similar to what we're seeing in Northgate, the U District, two of the big, bold visions of Greg Nichols?
I think so. I think it's important to him in his first term to sort of show that he's accomplished some major changes in the city and a couple neighborhoods that have languished for years. Northgate being one, South Lake Union being another. There's been plans to do large developments in both those neighborhoods that haven't gone forward. And in the midst of a recession, to be able to sort of point to job growth and economic development into these sort of neighborhoods would be a pretty strong campaign, something to campaign on.
Is there a risk in creating a biotech hub? Is that something that's another bubble is that as secure as a manufacturing job, which isn't as secure as we all thought anyway?
Right. No, there's definitely risks in going after the biotech strategy. Seattle has a very strong biotech presence, especially because of the University of Washington being a real leader in genetic research. However, compared to the actual number of companies in the other hubs, such as Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego, we trail behind those places.
We're in the second tier.
We're sort of, the top of the second tier. And a lot of the things that have been happening here are designed to sort of push Seattle into that first tier. And I think most analysts would say it's a gamble. You're gonna, there's no guarantee that this is going to be successful at all. On the other hand, Seattle has a lot of stuff going for it that would make that not necessarily a ridiculous gamble. I mean, it's a pretty good chance.
And the idea, I guess, here in our last minute is that biotech jobs, there's something special about biotech jobs. They're clean, they're higher paying. I mean, if you're going to create a hub about anything, biotech jobs is about the best hub you can create.
Yeah, I mean, high paid for most part. I mean, those scientists make a lot of money. And the support staff probably get paid really well, too. And also, a lot of what's going on in South Lake Union and Alan's vision is to create a sort of neighborhood where people who are making $50,000, $60,000 a year can live in that same neighborhood, right. And so it'd be a pretty strong addition to our economy if we were able to do it.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Marty McComber is a reporter with the Seattle Times. We thank you all for watching. Join us next time for another edition of City Inside Out. Until then, on behalf of our talented studio crew here at the program, I'm C.R. Douglas. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
SeattleChannel.org, connecting with life in the city.
Meetings not to be missed.
Get inside the issues.
News you need.
City stories.
Get involved.
See it now.
Cast your vote.
Tell
us what you think.